Last week we started looking at the Sermon on the Mount, which is Jesus' most famous teaching. And we talked about how the lens that you look at his teaching will affect how you respond to it. So we talked a little bit last week about how if you're looking just through a religious lens, it'll cause you to respond in one way. If you're looking just through a relationship lens, it will cause you to look a certain way. And it makes a difference. So we talked last week, just to remind you of my definition. I mean, religion, I'm not saying religion is bad, I'm just giving you a definition I'm using. And that is, religion is human activity to get God's attention, to try to get God's blessings. And relationship is God's activity bringing us into relationship with God so that we can be better at blessing the people around us. So the lens you look through makes a difference. So some would think, well, Jesus is just coming to throw out religion. So that means we don't need to follow all those old laws anymore. But what does Jesus say in the verses leading up to today's reading about throwing out the law? He says, "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until it's accomplished." So Jesus says, I didn't come to get rid of the law, but I came to fulfill it. I came to bring it to its original purposes. And what is he going to say later is the original purposes? To love God and to love your neighbor. So just following the letter of the law, looking at it through a religious lens, is a good beginning, and it's something that we don't want to throw out because the letter of the law was given to us to bless us. But Jesus says, let me take you a little bit deeper to see not just what will cause you to be able to keep the letter of the law, but to see what will help you to bring and accomplish the purposes of the law. So he goes on to show us a little bit magnification. Rather than throwing it out, he actually goes deeper into these laws. He says, "You've heard it said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you're angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. If you insult a brother or sister, you'll be liable to the council. If you say, you fool, you'll be liable to the hell of fire." First thing that I noticed when I read through that is Jesus saying something that no good rabbi of that day would say. But I say to you. No good rabbi would put those things that you've heard it said, but I say to you. Because the way that the rabbis were good rabbis was that they never asserted their own opinion. They always just quoted what somebody else said before. So they would say, Moses said this, or the prophet said this, or Rabbi so-and-so said this, but they would never say, but I say to you. So it's interesting when the crowds would hear Jesus preach, that was their response. They're saying, this guy preaches with authority. He's not like our teachers. He actually says something other than just quoting old sayings. So he's saying something where I've got something to bring more clarity to what this law is. And so as we look at what he has to say, we could say, well, if you just look at the law through religious lens, it would say, okay, you shall not murder. And it's very easy to figure out, have you done it or not? Have you physically murdered someone? And you could say, no, I haven't. And you could check that off your to-do list and say, I've never murdered anyone, so that means that I'm in good relationship with God and I'm going to be blessed. But through the lens of relationship, do you think that God's total purpose of the way we relate with each other is just to avoid murdering each other? If we're looking at relationship, then it's not, I've done enough so that I please God to get blessed, but have I lived in such a way that God gets access to me so my life can be a blessing to the people around me? So just by physically not murdering someone, does that mean that we've given God access to our lives to be a blessing to those around us? No, there might be a little bit more that we might need to do there. So maybe we didn't physically murder someone, but we are angry with them and we won't talk to them, or we're jealous of them, or we're stabbing them in the back, or we're slandering them, or we're doing things to harm them. And what Jesus is saying is maybe you didn't physically kill them, but the impact you're having on their life is to bring destruction to them rather than to bring life to them. So what he's saying is, if the impact of your life is not to bless them and give them life, then you're not giving God full access to your life. And in that way you're sinning. And you're not going to have a full experience of God in your life as long as you don't have good relationships with those around you. So basically he's tying those things together, that we can only have full and healthy relationship with God when we have full and healthy relationships with each other. So he says, if you're going to the altar and bringing your animal to the altar to be sacrificed, he says, leave that offering at the altar, and then before you go and do your religious ritual, which you think that, well, as a religious lens, I'm doing my religious duty of sacrificing my animal, so God's going to be pleased with me and I'll be blessed. But what Jesus is saying is, doing your religious duty isn't worth a whole lot if you haven't reconciled with your neighbor first. So he says, go reconcile with your neighbor and then do your religious duty. So even in our own service, you look at where we put the passing of the peace. The passing of the peace comes right before the offering. So basically, we have that in our own service. It's supposed to be a reminder of what Jesus says. That before you bring your offering, before you do the things to try to get God to be pleased with you, before you come up to the communion table, you need to get rid of the junk that's between you and the other people in the room. So even today, we follow that as part of our practice in worship. So he goes on a little further. He says, you've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you, anyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So once again, you look at it through the lens of religion, well, it's very easy to say, I did not have relations. No, I mean, it's easy to say that we haven't physically done something. But does that mean that we have a good, healthy relationship with the person that we are married to? Does that mean that we're giving full access to God to use us to bless that person in the sexual area of our lives? Not necessarily. So I could maybe have never had an adulterous relationship with someone, but if I'm spending 23 hours a day looking at pornography online, or 23 hours a day reading romance novels, do you think I'm not giving the full of what I'm supposed to be giving to the person that God has put in my life to bless? So whatever it is that gets in the way, with lust or whatever behaviors, if our whole goal is, okay, I've never actually broken that law, so I'm in good relationship with God, that's one way we can look at it. But if we look at it, am I giving God access to my life to be the blessing I'm supposed to be in my marriage, in my relationship? And once again, if you read through the Bible, that our relationship with God can also be limited but when we don't have a healthy relationship with our spouse. So they're tied together. Then it goes on a little bit further, talking about divorce. And I'm not going to go into this in depth. Some out here may have been divorced. So I'm not here to condemn anybody, but I'm just inviting us to look at how do we look at these things. That when we look at it through religion, then a marriage just is a legal contract. That it's a legal contract where Moses says it's okay for me to break it, so if I break it in the right way, then I'm not causing any trouble, and God is still happy with me. But do you think you want to be looked at by your husband or wife as just a legal contract? Or do you think you actually want to be looked at with love and commitment? And so what Jesus is saying is stop looking at all these things as legal contracts to please God. Look at your relationships with your friends and with your neighbors, and look at all these things, a relationship with your spouse, for how you can be a blessing to the people that God's put into your life. And finally, he goes on to say, and again, you've heard it said to those of ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you've made to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. So what does that mean? Once again, what lens are you looking through? Are you looking at your relationship with God through the lens of religion? How do you score lots of points with religion? Go out and make lots of vows. I vow I'm not going to eat chocolate for the next year, and I vow I'm going to stop drinking alcohol, and I vow I'm going to do this, and I vow I'm going to be on this committee. And in the process of trying to do all these vows to impress God, who are you not paying attention to? The people that are in your life. So what God is saying is, stop trying to do all these vows to impress me and actually just focus on how you're living your life. Be a person of integrity. Be someone whose yes is yes and whose no is no, who's not manipulative, who is honorable, who is someone who you can trust, because that's the kind of person that I can use to bless your neighbor. If you're just busy trying to do religious stuff to please me, a lot of your attention of just living your life out to be a blessing to your neighbor will probably be distracted. So to quickly just summarize, that if you don't know how to love God and love your neighbor, the place to start is by following the letter of the law. Because if you don't know what to do, God gives some good guidelines. Don't murder. Don't commit adultery. But once you figured out how to keep the letter of the law, don't be satisfied. Because that's not going to give you the fullness of relationship with God and your neighbor that he wants for you. So then the next thing is to say, God, okay, I figured out the letter of the law. Now show me the intent of the law. Show me the heart behind it, so that I'm not satisfied anymore just avoiding murdering people, but that I learn how to love people better. So I'm not satisfied by just avoiding adultery, but that I actually am more available to my spouse. So I'm not satisfied just keeping all of the vows that I make in church, but I want to be available to really be the person who can bless my neighbor. And in the process, we will enter into the kingdom of God in ways that the Pharisees don't. Because the Pharisees are just good at doing the letter of the law. Those who understand the heart of the law are the ones who actually enter into the kingdom. And God uses them to be a blessing. Amen.